The death of Jesus. And as they led him away, they seized one Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, and laid on him the cross to carry it behind Jesus. Two others, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And they cast lots to divide his garments. And the people stood by watching, but the rulers scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged with him railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And having said this, he breathed his last. So crucifixion is one of the most grotesque and gruesome means of ending a human life that has ever been devised. It was painful, degrading, dehumanizing. That's the whole point of it. And usually around Easter time, sometimes a medical journal will publish an article that talks about the medical phenomenon of crucifixion and the pain that an unlucky victim endures, how the nails sever median nerves, and how the rib cage compresses onto the lungs, and how the victim slowly dies by suffocation. And it's interesting that in the Christian tradition, the gospel writer Luke is a physician. And as he's observing the crucifixion, he's not writing about the crucifixion from a medical perspective. His emphasis, his focus is elsewhere. And that's important to us because at the heart of the Christian faith is the death of Christ. But we see Luke is not just recording the death of Jesus, he's recording what's happening around in the other characters in the story of the crucifixion. And that's important because not just is the crucifixion event important, our response to the crucifixion, the death of Jesus, is important as well. Luke is recording all sorts of interactions between Jesus and the people around him on Skull Hill, about the religious leaders, the soldiers, the other criminals who were crucified with him, the passers-by as they observed the event. And it's interesting that as Jesus is hanging on the cross, he only has 2 interactions with other people as the gospel writer Luke records it. He has a conversation with his Father in heaven, and then he has a conversation with one of the crooks next to him. And what was it about this criminal hanging next to Jesus that got him to talk back to him? What did this person come to realize about Jesus, and what do we need to see about Jesus as well? I want to consider 2 things as we go and see Jesus hanging on the cross at Skull Hill. I want us to look at the criminal's realization, what he saw, what he understood about Jesus, and then I want to see the king's response. The criminal's realization and the king's response. You see, what sets this person apart, what got Jesus to talk back to this person was that this crook on the cross did something that nobody else witnessing the death of the Son of God comprehended in that moment. This criminal saw what no one else saw. He felt what no one else felt, and he said what no one else said. Consider that this criminal saw what no one else saw, and that's that Jesus really, truly is a king. Now, sure, there's a sign above Jesus' head that says he's a king, but everybody knows that's a joke. because you don't find kings on crosses. In the first century, saying the word crucifixion was like saying a swear word. It was unlucky. It would cause a jinx if you said it, so nobody even dared mention it in their daily lives, because people know that you don't find kings on crosses. For those who have committed gross sin, for those who have been on the margins of society or are social outcasts, the cross says that no one is coming for you. No one sees you. No one cares about you. And for those who are already not worth remembering in history, the crucifixion is one last step in erasing your memory from existence, from the history books. A king would not even attend a crucifixion, much less be the victim of one. In other words, kings don't show up in the darkness. For those on the margins, they say that God doesn't come for you. No one comes for you. No one, that is, except Jesus. And while we're not sure how this criminal gets it, he sees that Jesus is more than just a man. He's more than the people who put him up there and made him out to be. And when it comes to understanding what took place on this Friday 2,000 years ago, it's important for us to know that when it comes to Jesus, he is more than just a mere man. He's God in the flesh. And even though he hangs from that tree with much of that flesh ripped away from him, it doesn't make that fact any less true. The death of Christ is an injustice, yes, but it's more than an injustice. The death of Christ is an example of sacrificial love, but it's much more than that. The cross is God showing up in the dark. Not just above the darkness giving judgment, but in the darkness bearing judgment. Jesus is in the eye of the storm, bearing the full weight of God's wrath and punishment against sin. And unless you view the cross in this way, you won't see what Easter is all about. This is why the Jews and the religious leaders and the Romans miss it, because they don't have a category for God showing up in the dark. But isn't this precisely why Jesus came? You remember his teachings? He says it's not the healthy that need a doctor, it's the sick. It's not those who think they're found who need a savior. It's those who know they're lost. It's not the ones who are free who need to be further liberated. It's those who are captive that need a ransom, that need a king. And that's exactly what this thief sees. He sees that Jesus truly is a king, but not just that, he feels what nobody else feels. Everybody else observing the crucifixion of Jesus thinks that they've done the right thing. The religious leaders feel like they've done the right thing, having snuffed out somebody who's going to stir up the Romans and intervene and spoil the parade on their big Passover feast. The Romans think that they're in the right, simply doing their job, following orders. Even the criminals on the cross think they're innocent, and they're asking Jesus to get them all down from the cross together. But this criminal, hanging next to Jesus, feels what no one else feels, and he feels that he is guilty and deserving of judgment. As the other crook on the other side is yelling at Jesus to get us all off the cross, this criminal rebukes him and says, "Do you not know who you're talking to? We know why we've been put here. We know that we did something wrong, but this person between us, he's innocent. He hasn't done a single thing wrong. Everyone else in this scene is guilty, and the one person who has no business being crucified is the one who's hanging on the tree." You see, when it comes to understanding the cross, we not only need to see what he saw, we need to feel what he felt, because unless we feel ourselves as the people who have put Jesus up on the cross, through the ways that we have sinned against God, against the ways that we have degraded and dehumanized the people made in his image, the way that we have contributed to the brokenness and the fragmentation and the disintegration of the world, we're not going to experience the power of Easter. We need to see ourselves for who we really are, as guilty people in need of judgment. And because this is God's world, because God is perfectly holy and just, he is not going to let the things that keep breaking his world persist in it. And so the cross is God's answer to how he does away with sin and evil without doing away with the sinner and the evildoer. The cross is God's answer to how he does away with evil without doing away with us. And the cross won't make sense to you unless you see the cross as God's solution for your sin and for mine. The cross doesn't make sense unless you see that Christ has come to bear the wounds that we caused on the cosmos, and the wounds that we've inflicted on others, so that by his stripes we might be healed. That's what the criminal feels. He sees Christ's innocence, he feels his own guilt, and then he says the one thing that no one else says. You hear the responses from everybody else in the crowd. The religious leaders are mocking Jesus. Say, save yourself. The soldiers are also mocking Jesus. If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself. The crook on the cross is saying, you're a king, right? You're God's Messiah. You should be saving yourself and us. But that's not what this criminal says. Rather, he looks at Jesus and he says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Remember me. Remember me. Remember me. He recognizes that the person who seems at this moment in time to be the most powerless is actually the one who's the most powerful, the one who is able to do for him what he's unable to do for himself. You see, this criminal looks at Jesus, and rather than dying in his sin, he looks at the one who's dying for his sin. And he asks Jesus to remember him. Remember me, Jesus, when you come into your kingdom. Get me into your kingdom, Jesus, even if that means I'm only part of it in memory. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. That's the criminal's realization. He sees God for who he really is. He sees himself for who he really is, and then he reaches out, asking for God's grace in the midst of his judgment, asking for mercy and salvation to be preserved in the king's memory. That was the realization that he made. And what is Jesus' response? Jesus' response is remarkable. It's brief. It's only about 13 words, but every one of it is pregnant with meaning and significance. He looks at this criminal hanging on the cross with him, and he says, truly I tell you, he's swearing an oath, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Today you will be with me in paradise. Consider how significant each part of that phrase is. The first word, today. Isn't that more than what this person was hoping for? He asked Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Like one day, someday, when you get into your kingdom, Jesus, can you remember me? And Jesus says, I'll do you better than someday. How about today? Today you will be with me in paradise. And friends, this is the offer of the gospel. It's an invitation to experience immediate relief from our guilt, our shame, our sin, our fear, our anxiety, and so much more. Because haven't we spent our whole lives trying to do business with guilt and shame on our own? And aren't we no further from being free of those things than the day that we first started? Like Lady Macbeth in Shakespeare's play, there's blood on our hands, and no matter how hard we scrub, we cannot wash ourselves clean. You see, the offer of the gospel is that the very second you recognize your need and come to Jesus is the very second you can be forgiven and set free. The Christian life isn't like applying to grad school where you need a killer GPA and awesome references, because this thief would have failed every single test. And salvation, the offer of the gospel, isn't even just wiping the slate clean, because we know that the very moment that the slate is erased, he would just go out and muddy the slate up again. Jesus says, I forgive you full and free, and I throw away the slate, because it's not based on what you've done. It's based on the salvation that I offer you. Jesus looks at the criminal on the cross and says, you can stop your striving, because it is finished. It is finished. I have done the work. Today, you can experience relief. Today, you can experience forgiveness. Today, you can experience grace. And friends, don't you want that? Because that's what Jesus gives us because of the cross. And for you to experience it today, all you need to do is look to him. Give Christ your sin, and he will give you his grace. Not someday, but today. I could talk more about the goodness of today, but notice what else this criminal gets. He gets to be today with Jesus in paradise. He gets to be in paradise. And the idea of paradise was a pretty loaded term in the first century, but it actually doesn't look a whole lot different than how we might envision paradise today. Paradise is this land of perpetual bliss where it's not even where bad things don't happen. It's where bad things can't happen, where those things aren't even rumored to take place in this world of paradise. It's a place where evil and sickness and plague and death are no more. And Jesus promises that there's going to be no threat to your security, nothing that can take away your joy or the fullness of your life. Jesus says paradise is the perfect place, and today you get to be with me there. And as this thief can attest, paradise is not a reward for a life well lived. Paradise isn't earned, it's rather given to those who know that they could never make it there on their own. Paradise is something that's given to those who know that they can't get there by themselves. And friends, don't you want to go there? Doesn't your heart burn within you and tell you that this place exists, that this longing for paradise isn't just a wistful hope that's been put into our hearts by Disney movies, that this is the eternity that God has placed into our hearts? It's the thing that C.S. Lewis says, that if there is a desire inside of ourselves that this world cannot satisfy, the only logical conclusion must be that God made us for another world. Jesus says that other world is paradise, and friends, you can enter into it today. You can come and experience it today. And there's one more piece of this phrase that Jesus said that I want us to dwell on, and I think it's the best piece of it all. Jesus says, today, you're going to be in paradise with me. Jesus says, with me, you'll be in paradise. And this phrase is by far the best part of the whole sentence, because for us, the promise of paradise is still far off in the future. But this promise of with me, that promise of with me is for us right here and right now. That by the power of the Holy Spirit, we can experience the freedom from the guilt and the shame that weighs us down, that the anxiety and fear that grips our souls. And right now, we can experience peace and freedom and forgiveness in the presence of Jesus. Not someday, but today. Not in some future paradise, but in our own personal darkness, in our own personal suffering and experiences. And if you talk to counselors about people who deal with guilt and shame, they say it's one thing to get absolution, to be told that you're forgiven, but we often need more than just forgiveness. We need presence. We need people who walk with us through the midst of our suffering and our hurt. People who not just come at us with words that remind us of what is true, but whose presence says that even when you struggle to believe what is true, I'm not going anywhere. I'm walking with you every step of the way. And that is exactly what we get in Jesus. There's no better gift that God could give to us than his very self. And if the cross tells us that if God won't even spare his own son in order for us to be his, won't he also with Jesus give us all things and more? So friends, today I'm almost certain that none of us will die by crucifixion. Probably won't be any medical journal that's written up about the way that we die. But I will say that I'm certain that the mortality rate in 2024 is still one person for every one person. All of us will die, and when we go through that valley of the shadow of death, friends, for those of us who trust in Jesus, we have the assurance that we will not walk that valley alone. That Jesus, the Good Shepherd, has traversed that valley for us. He's gone on ahead. He knows the curves, the twists, the turns, the bends. And he walks alongside us now, not as some impotent comforter who doesn't know what to do. He walks with us as the Good Shepherd who knows the way out. He's taken the wood of his cross and he's turned them into the tools of the shepherd, the rod and the staff, which comfort us. And in that Savior, in that shepherd, we can find comfort because we know that even in our darkest moments, Jesus has promised to lead us and to be with us. And as believers, we know that death has lost its sting, but on Friday on Skull Hill, it still hurts. The author of life has been put to death. God has been murdered. But so has our sin, our guilt, and our shame. Things are dark now, darker than they have ever been, but dawn is soon breaking.